Good morning, everyone. I make that precisely 11 o'clock, so we will start, and I expect a few more people will join over the next couple of minutes. But good morning. Thank you for joining, and a very warm welcome to the third and final in our series of tax year end behind the scenes webinars with Blackfinch. I'm Tim Wynn-Jones, and I'm once again joined by Dr. Nick Pillow from the Blackfinch Ventures team. Many attendees on the webinar today have attended the last two webinars over the past fortnight to hear more about some of the new investments that we've made and some of the prospective areas of investments into next tax year. So a warm thank you to those who have stayed the course. And for the newcomers today, welcome. You can, if you wish, catch up on the last two webinars by visiting the Blackfinch YouTube channel. During this series, each week we've looked at one actual new investment through our energy transition EIS portfolio, and we've done a deep dive on one prospective area for future investments based on the energy transition investment framework. The usual housekeeping. Today's webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes. It is being recorded, so it can be accessed and shared after the session today. Again, we plan to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you may have. And if we don't have time to answer them, we'll be sure to come back to you. I also need to start by stating that Blackfinch is regulated by the FCA. Please be aware that the contents of today's webinar do not constitute financial advice. And as another reminder, EIS investments are classified as high risk. So you shouldn't invest unless you're willing to lose all of the money you invest. However, we would certainly encourage you to understand the tax reliefs and loss reliefs through EIS investments. So please speak to your regional business development manager or contact us directly if you'd like to understand those in greater detail. So the focus of this series of webinars, as I say, has been the energy transition EIS portfolio, as this was a new product launch for us in October last year, and it gives us a great platform to bring our investment process to life by talking about our first cohort of investments in the space. As a recap, we invest in companies developing technologies across the three largest greenhouse gas emitting sectors of the economy, being buildings, transport, and industry. And we invest across three technology themes: generation and storage, distribution, and digital. The reason that we have such conviction in investing in these types of companies and across these verticals are really threefold. One, they're supported by very strong regulatory incentives or indeed penalties, so buyers are really compelled to act. Two, low carbon energy and technologies have seen significant quality development and cost reductions over recent years. And three, what's known as the electrification of buildings and also higher energy prices, and not just buildings, transport and industry, have stimulated a lot of market demand for solar energy, batteries, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and digitals, which we collectively refer to as NTech. So onto our investments, moving on to the next slide. In the first of the series, we discussed our new portfolio addition, GT Wings, with its proprietary air wing technology, decarbonising commercial shipping. And in a moment, Nick has another exciting update about its transatlantic crossing, which is, certainly quite a sight to behold. And last week, we introduced Adia Thermal. So that's another new investment from Blackfinch into a hardware and software company, streamlining the installation of home heat pumps. Today, we will be doing a deep dive into a third new investment, Supercritical. And then we'll look at another potential area of future investment interest for us within the energy transition EIS portfolio. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Nick, who has that other quick update on GT Wings before he discusses Supercritical. Nick.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so we've been following GT Wings' first installation for over the last couple of weeks with these webinars. And if you were on last week, you might have seen the ship it's installed on, the Vectis Progress, was just leaving Bilbao and heading out across the Atlantic. This week, you can see it has it's crossed, and it's not quite a live update, but you can see it there heading into Canada, which is its destination, at that big red splodge there on the map. And just a reminder for those who perhaps weren't on the earlier webinars, that what they've got, what GT Wings has got, is this. It's like a vertical wing. It's got a wing sail, and it's harnessing the wind. And we've got some footage from its Atlantic crossing here. So that thing at the front of the ship there is this air wing. It's about 20 meters tall. So, I mean, it doesn't look very much there, but that is quite a substantial bit of equipment. They're actually going to be building a 40-meter one for even bigger ships. Some people have commented with this how oh yeah, what's a wind turbine going to do on a ship, thinking of some sort of cruise around the Mediterranean. Well, this is the Atlantic. There are some fierce winds whipping across there. It's not a wind turbine. It's actually directly harnessing the wind and providing forward thrust on this ship so that it uses less fuel. And it's really quite impressive to see it in action now. I hope you're not getting too seasick from the footage as the ship's going up and down as well. But very exciting to see that progress, and we are eagerly awaiting the results. As I say, this is the first of their air wings. It's the first sea trial, so yeah, very exciting to see the effects it had in that crossing. But as Tim said, our focus today is actually a different company. It's a company called Supercritical, and it's all about hydrogen. Now, you might think of hydrogen for the energy transition as being a potential fuel for vehicles, which would be the transport sector. You might think of it as a replacement for natural gas for homes and heating. And you might think, well, those are all a little bit speculative. And you'd be right. There are, lots of possible future uses for hydrogen in the energy transition. However, hydrogen is used today in vast quantities in industry, not as a fuel, but as a raw ingredient into chemical production. So, for example, it is a core ingredient that goes into the manufacture of ammonia, which is itself used in textiles, in cleaning products that you'd see in your home, and in fertilizer. These are vast markets, vast quantities of ammonia, which in turn require vast quantities of hydrogen. And that hydrogen, by and large, is nearly all produced from fossil fuels at the moment with greenhouse gas emissions. But it is possible to create hydrogen from water. You might have done this at school, where you stick a couple of electrodes in, and you get the gas bubbling up, and that's where the water is split into hydrogen and oxygen. But the trouble is, on an industrial scale, at the moment, that doesn't compare in terms of cost. It's more expensive. It's a lot more expensive to generate the hydrogen by splitting the water from electricity than it is just to start with your fossil fuels and create hydrogen that way. But there are some very interesting companies coming along, and Supercritical is one of them. And the reason they are particularly interesting, and that we particularly liked this company over others that were working in a similar space, is they can actually remove a whole other piece of industrial equipment that's needed in the production of these chemicals. So when you're creating ammonia, you don't just need hydrogen. You need hydrogen that's been compressed to over 200 times atmospheric pressure. So what you normally have is a big bit of kit that creates hydrogen, and then another very big bit of kit that compresses that hydrogen up to these very high pressures that are needed in the industrial processes. That's expensive to have another big bit of kit, and they're not necessarily that reliable either, because it's you know what it's like with an air compressor for your car tires. They have a certain lifetime, and that's usually it. If you can remove that, you're onto something which is a very, very big cost saver for the manufacturers. And that's what Supercritical's managed to do. They have a way of electrolyzing the water, that's splitting the water into hydrogen and oxygen at very high pressures. So the water goes in at pressure. It's easy to put pressure on the water, and then use renewable energy, electricity, and it creates hydrogen at these pressures, which can be over 200 times atmospheric pressure. So, and it happens to be a very efficient process as well. So they've got a more efficient process in terms of the energy you put in for the hydrogen you get out, and it's already at the pressure you need. So in that industrial situation where hydrogen is required today at very large scales, they are able to cost effectively, compete with hydrogen created from fossil fuels. It is, of course, still an early stage company. And I've been talking about our investment process over the last couple of weeks as well, and how we have a very objective process, how we try to take the personalities out of things at the early stages, how we have our very detailed pitch sessions, which run typically for over 3 hours, where we've really looked into a lot of detail of the company and really pull it apart and get to the the detail. So we ran through very much the same sort of process with Supercritical as with the other companies I've talked about in the other webinars. But I wanted to focus this time a bit on the later stages of our process, because once we've found something that looks interesting, we found out all these properties about it. In this case, yes, not just it is an electrolyzer, it's doing something that could be useful, but it's doing it in a way which is really quite game changing and is going to give it a huge advantage over all the other companies that are trying to work in a similar space. But it's then when we've made that decision, we like it. We've still got to go through due diligence. We've still got to sort of really make sure that everything the company has told us has stacked up. And we run through various types of due diligence, obviously checking the financials, and we're quite good at that. We're quite good at the technology because many of us are founders, or we have technology backgrounds. I have a PhD, but mine's in artificial intelligence. Doesn't really help so much when we're talking about detailed hydrogen technology. But we've got a bit of a context. We can make sense of what these companies are saying, but we need to go into more detail. And so one of the things that we always do is commission external due diligence from a technical specialist in the field where it's something particular like this. And that's typically a professor, who's got exactly the right experience, understands all the technologies that are out there. Because yes, this might sound convincing on its own, but what about the other things that are coming along? And so we pull in that expertise. And in this particular case as well, because it's a slightly later stage company, compared to say Adia that I was talking about last week, we want to know. Has it really made the progress? Is it delivering the technical results, even though it's not commercial yet? Because these types of company do need a lot of work, a lot of proof points as they scale up to be able to work at that industrial scale. Does it really stack up? Does it deliver the results, not just theoretically from a professor, but in practice? And we clearly don't have the resources in a company like Blackfinch to be able to, effectively test it. But other investors do. And one of the interesting things with a company like this at this stage is that we can then, rely and we get sight of testing that's done by other potential investors. And this investment was a big round. They raised a total of £14 million, and we were only putting in a small part of that. The deal was led by Shell and Toyota, very big companies, a lot of expertise, a lot of industrial and manufacturing expertise, and they did a lot of very detailed work. And as I say, we're not party to that as such, but we do get sight of the results, and we get to talk to them about what they think about it and the risks that they see, and the level of achievement. And so that's something that gives us a lot more confidence at this later stage company, where the valuation is necessarily that bit higher, that we think actually, yes, it really does stack up. What they've told us is true, and we have that confidence going in to help fund the next stage as they scale up towards commercial deployments, which will still take a little while, but we have high hopes for in the future. There are other types of due diligence as well. The tax is obviously very important for us. We make sure absolutely that every company qualifies for the EIS and VCT schemes as appropriate, and we get external specialists to validate that for us, so we can be really confident in all the aspects of the company. And of course, I did talk a bit about the team side of it last week with Adia. Again, with Supercritical, we don't just interview the founders. We talk with pretty much the whole team to be able to get their views and understand the internal culture. But that was something I focused more on last week. But still a very important element. So that is Supercritical. Creating hydrogen for established demand within industry at very high pressures, really solving a key problem facing the industry today. Very exciting potential, but we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Nick. So hopefully you'll remember that in the earlier webinars, we've discussed areas where we see potential for future investments. In the first session a couple of weeks ago, we discussed home energy management systems. So if you remember, that was integrating solar panels, battery storage, electric vehicle charging, heat pumps. All these different dispersed energy technologies need to work in harmony. So home energy management systems is one area where we think there is very good opportunity for growth. Last week, we looked at electric vehicles for last mile delivery within urban logistics. Again, another area where, due to upcoming regulation around decongestion of urban areas, we expect to see a lot of pressure on deliveries via vans, and that creates opportunities for things like e-cargo bikes and other electric vehicles to be able to do that last mile delivery from out of town fulfillment centres to people's homes and businesses. But today we're going to explore something that is absolutely critical to the entirety of the energy transition, and that is digital supply chain management. So hopefully, as you will have gathered from this series, we are tremendously excited about the boom of energy tech, or NTech, as I described it earlier. Very exciting. Batteries, electric vehicles, solar panels. It's a huge global industry, and the costs of these technologies have fallen very, very quickly at the same time as quality has improved. So now, as we've discussed before a number of times, where we have non-petro states, where there aren't natural reserves of oil and gas, countries like China are investing huge amounts in electrification and developing new clean energy technologies. However, the supply chain and manufacture of these technologies, they're very complex, and there may be thousands of companies involved all across the world to manufacture a single product. And that brings a lot of risk: forced labor, mining, deforestation, and regulators, investors, and customers rightfully expect companies sourcing these technologies and their components to be doing that responsibly and to have total supply chain visibility. That is a big undertaking. There are specific regulations coming to force, such as the EU battery regulation, the YIGA Forced Labour Prevention Act. And in order to comply with this regulation, but also protect their reputations, organizations like Renewable Energy Project, the developers, for example, have had to undertake a lot of manual data collection about their supply chains. And that can be very cumbersome. It can be inaccurate. It can be very opaque. So this is where digital tools, and AI in particular, can make a huge difference. Using machine learning algorithms to automate that data collection, analyze the data, identify risks and actions to overcome those risks. So combining data provided by manufacturers with other data points such as supplier information, customs data, etc., you get a very detailed and de-risked picture that ultimately improves the integrity of the supply chain and ensures the transition away from fossil fuels is true, is efficient, and is fair. So we see a lot of appetite for this type of solution by technology companies and project developers, because the cost of implementing this solution is absolutely dwarfed by the size of potential fines or reputational damage if they continue with business as usual. So an area that's very interesting, really capturing a lot of attention at the moment, capitalizing on a lot of the developments around AI and machine learning, and something that, due to our ventures portfolio, where we have a lot of experience in software as a service, and these kind of digital tools, and Nick mentioned his own personal PhD in AI, we have expertise within the business, and we think this is a really great application of those type of tools that will see a lot of good growth in the market. So with that, I am going to hand back to Nick again, who's just going to recap on the final fees, details, and timings for investment in the VCT and EIS portfolios.
So the practical details, and these apply to our energy transition EIS portfolios, but also to our general tech Blackfinch Ventures EIS portfolios. And the minimum investment is £10,000. And we will split that typically over at least 10 companies. I'll come back to diversification in a moment, but typically into at least 10 companies, each of which is a separate investment. We would expect essentially a separate investment would run on its own timeline. We expect to hold it for between 4 and 7 years. That's our target, but it can take longer. So that £10,000 or however much will the returns will come at different points over the subsequent years. And we are aiming to make a return of about 3 times across the portfolio as a whole on those underlying investments. We don't invest in a company unless we think it's got the potential to deliver a 10 times return. And we very much hope that some of them will achieve that. But we also know that others will very likely fail. These are high-risk investments. And so, we expect on balance, we are aiming for this 3 times return. The fees for that, it's a 3% upfront portfolio establishment fee, and then 2% a year on the funds that have been deployed, but capped at 4 years. So we don't take any management fee after those first 4 years. Bit of an encouragement for us to make sure that we're not holding on to the investment longer than we need to. Thinking of that 4 to 7 year target exit period. And then we take a performance fee, a standard 20%, but only over a hurdle of 130%. So, the first uplift of 30% over and above what was invested comes completely free of any performance fee. Now, there is still time to invest before the end of the tax year. So for both those EIS portfolio products, the deadline is at close of business on Monday. So it is that close now, the 24th of March. Any applications and cleared funds we receive by close of business on Monday, on the 24th, we will be able to fully deploy this tax year, and obviously can therefore benefit from carryback. That is subject to a diversification waiver in case we cannot deploy 10 companies. And to be very clear, because the energy transition portfolios is a new product, there would definitely be reduced diversification. So you would get a smaller portfolio than the 10 companies if you want deployment this tax year with that product. The Ventures EIS portfolios, we would still aim to deliver 10 companies, but if you absolutely have to have the funds deployed this tax year, we just have to waiver in case that's not possible. And for completeness, we also have the Blackfinch Spring Venture Capital Trust, our VCT, and that you've got a bit longer to get in on that one. The deadline is 5 p.m. on the 3rd of April. So all funds, cleared funds and applications received by 5 p.m. on the 3rd of April will be deployed in this tax year for the VCT. We have online applications, so there should be no reason you can't get even your EIS applications in by close of business on Monday. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. So that just leaves a few minutes now for questions. We have had a question come through saying, what are the incentives and benefits of investing before the end of tax year? Nick, if you're happy to say that one.
Um, Before the end of the tax year, well, it depends on the product, of course, but we recognise that most clients are investing for tax benefits as well as the potential returns. With the VCT, any funds deployed in this tax year will obviously earn for eligible investors their 30% income tax relief for this year. For EIS, you can get income tax relief on this year or the previous tax year. So if you still have an allowance up to the limits, for VCT, it's up to £200,000 in 1 year. For EIS, it's normally £1 million, can be higher in certain circumstances. And so if you've got the income tax liability and the unused allowance, you can gain that income tax benefit this year, and for EIS also for last year.
Thanks, Nick. Another question here was more thematic around energy transition. So, do renewable energy projects and electric vehicles always save more carbon emissions than they generate through their manufacturing? So, I can take that one. So, yes, EVs and energy technologies can be quite energy intensive during the manufacturing processes, but typically their operational benefits will outweigh those initial costs. So, looking at cars, for example, EVs are about 90% efficient, in conversion of energy to power, whereas internal combustion engines, so petrol and diesel cars, are typically about 25% efficient. But you've also got to consider here with a petrol and diesel or with any fossil fuel, there's no circularity. Once you've extracted and burnt a fossil fuel, that's it. Whereas with batteries, they can be repurposed for stationary storage, for example. With solar panels, they can be recycled, and component parts like polysilicon can be reused. So you do get a lot more lifetime benefits from these technologies. And indeed, with the example of the supply chain tech that we looked at, one of the benefits there is really understanding whether the requirement for materials in the first place can be reduced through technology improvements. So I expect we'll see a lot of progress there in future years. And lastly, it's important to remember that grids worldwide are seeing more and more renewable energy and storage come online. So as we see grid decarbonisation, we'll also see the manufacture of clean energy technologies decarbonised in the process. So that's progress that we're already seeing across the board. There's one more question. Again, Nick, this probably one comes to you. Does Blackfinch prioritise investments in the energy transition based on climate impact over returns?
Let's be very clear. We are here for returns for clients. We see the energy transition as a huge trend, as Tim alluded to earlier. It's got to a tipping point really, where the benefits of the financial benefits of energy transition technologies are outweighing established technologies. And so, to take, and in other cases, there are regulatory drivers. So with GT Wings, where we saw that ship, there are going to be increasingly heavy financial penalties for shipping companies that do not install technologies to reduce their fuel consumption. And they have to reduce their fuel consumption, otherwise it will become increasingly expensive. And you don't worry about what's happening in America. A lot of this is driven by Europe. So any ship traveling to or from Europe will be subject to these. And so there is a market being created for these technologies that will, in that case, reduce the fuel consumption. So some technology is going to be bought. It's about us picking the right technologies that we think have got the best chance of being the ones that are adopted at scale, and that will make the returns for clients. And similarly, on something like supercritical, the real excitement about that technology is not it's a way to do green hydrogen cheaper. It's a way to do hydrogen cheaper, and so that's where the potential for real returns comes. We are very clear. We are looking at the commercial demand for these products, not not just the potential benefit they have if they were adopted to reduce carbon emissions.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And that is us perfectly at time. Thank you very much to everybody for joining today. And indeed, those of you who have enjoyed all three of these webinar sessions. And if you are interested in investing, as Nick says, you can complete the online illustrations and applications or speak to us before the end of Monday for the EIS portfolios. Many thanks for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.